The last time we started with problem 841 and we haven't finished it yet. So let us continue with problem 841 before starting with a new chapter, chapter number 16. Who would like to read us the problem 841, just to remember what are the information that was given? Yes, anyone? Yes, please. Yes.
Green Company manufactures cloth shopping bags that it plans to sell for $5 each.
Continue, please.
Budgeted production and sales for these bags for 2011 is 800,000 bags.
Yes.
With a standard of 400,000 machine hours for the whole year. Budgeted fixed overhead costs are $470,000. And variable overhead cost is $1.6 per machine hour. Because of increased demand, actual production and sales of the bags for 2010 are 900,000 bags, using 440,000 actual machine hours. Actual variable overhead costs are $688,600, and
the actual variable is 99,600. Yes.
And actual fixed overhead is 501,900.
Yes.
Actual selling price is $6 per bag. Direct materials and direct labor actual costs were the same as standard cost, which were $1.2 per unit and $1.9 and $1.8 per unit.
1.2 and 1.8 per unit. Therefore, this is the information that was given, or that is given within the question, or question 841. Of course, the requirement number one that we solved the last time was to calculate the variable overhead variances and the fixed overhead variances. And of course, we calculated the variances according to the columnar presentation. And we found out that we have a favorable 16,000 efficiency variance for the variable overhead, and a 4,400 spending variance, which was also favorable. And for the fixed overhead variances, we had a 31,900 unfavorable spending variance and a 58,750 favorable production volume variance. Now let us consider the second requirement, number 2.
Create a chart like that in Exhibit 7 showing flexible budget variance and sales volume variance for revenues, cost, contribution margin, and operating income.
Therefore, they need, or they require from us to prepare the presentation of the flexible budget variances and the sales volume variances, which is our level 2 analysis. As we said, this is our level 2 analysis of the variances. Therefore, let us start, of course, first of all by the actual, and then of course the flexible budget variance, which is the difference between the flexible budget and the actual, and then the sales volume variance, which is the difference between the static budget and the flexible budget. Of course, we are going to start our analysis by stating what was the actual and what was the budgeted number of units. Therefore, the number of units produced, or the number of bags produced and sold for the actual. As we can see here, it was 900,000 bags. Of course, the flexible budget would be the same amount, while as the budgeted number of units that was produced or to be produced was 800,000. Therefore, as we can see here, we budgeted to produce 800, and we only produced more than the 800,000. Therefore, we are going to have a sales volume variance. Of course, we do not have a flexible budget variance here, and the sales volume variance is 100,000 units. Now, let us start with our presentation of the income statement. First of all, let us start with the revenues, or sales revenues. 5,400,000, which of course is the 900,000 actual number of units multiplied by the actual selling price by the amount of $6. While as the flexible budget amount, the 900,000 units multiplied by the budgeted price of $5, it would be 4,500,000. And of course, the static budget amount would be 800,000 multiplied by the 5 budgeted price, which would be 4 million. Of course, the difference between the 4 million and the 4,500,000 is a 500,000. Favorable or unfavorable? Of course, favorable. And the difference between the 4,500,000 and the 5,400,000 is a 900,000, which is also favorable. Any questions? Now let us consider the variable costs. We have direct materials. The actual direct materials cost would be 900,000 multiplied by 1.2, which would give us the amount of 1,080,000. For the flexible budget, it would be also 900,000 multiplied by the same 1.2, because in the question they told us specifically that there are no variances, there are no differences between the budgeted and the actual cost for the direct materials and the direct labor. Therefore, we are not going to have any flexible budget variances for the direct materials and for the direct labor. Of course, in this case, in this question, it would be the same, 1,080,000. Of course, no flexible budget variance. And according to our static budget, it would be 800,000 multiplied by the 1.2, which would equal $960,000. Of course, the difference between the 960 and the 1,080,000 is $120,000. Do you think this is a favorable or unfavorable? Unfavorable, because the costs were more than the budget. Now let us consider the direct labor. Of course, the direct labor for the actual is 1.8 multiplied by 900,000, which would be $1,620,000, which would be the same for the flexible budget, because we do not have any differences between the budgeted and the actual cost for the direct materials and the direct labor. Therefore, 1,620,000, and of course we would have a $0 variance in this case. According to our static budget, 1.8 Yes, 1.8 multiplied by 800,000 would equal 1,440,000. Of course, the difference between the two is 180, of course, also unfavorable. Now let us consider the variable overhead. According to the variable overhead, the actual is given as one number, 699,600. The flexible budget would be 1.6, which is the budgeted amount or the budgeted cost. 1.6 per machine hour multiplied by how much? The 1.6, you need to make sure that this 1.6 should be multiplied by the number of machine hours, not the number of units. Therefore, what do you think? 440 is the actual machine hours, correct? Yes. But the flexible budget needs to consider the standard machine hours for the actual output, correct? Therefore, we calculated it the last time. We said that the standard machine hour per unit, according to these two numbers, is 0.5, correct? The 400,000 machine hours divided by 800,000 units would equal 0.5 machine hours per unit. Correct? Therefore, how many machine hours do we need for the flexible budget? Therefore, for the flexible budget, we would need 0.5 multiplied by 900,000, which will equal 450,000 machine hours. Therefore, the 450,000 now machine hours multiplied by 1.6 would give us the variable manufacturing overhead costs. You need to be cautious of these amounts and interpret it in the terms of whether it is for a unit, whether it is for a machine hour, whether it is for a direct labor hour, and so on. Therefore, 450,000 machine hours multiplied by 1.6, it would equal $720,000. Now, according to our static budget, we are going to consider the 800,000 units using the 400,000 machine hours multiplied by the 1.6. Therefore, it would be $640,000. The $640,000 is according to the 400,000 machine hours, because these are the standard machine hours to be used to produce the 800,000 units. Therefore, the 400,000 machine hours multiplied by the $1.6 per machine hour would give us the 640,000, which is the static budget cost for the variable overhead. Of course, we would have also an unfavorable variance by the amount of 80,000. And of course, here we would have a favorable variance by the amount of 20,400. Any questions? Of course, the total would be as follows, which is the total variable costs, 3,399,600. A total flexible budget variance for the variable costs, 20,400. 400, of course, also favorable. Total variable cost for the flexible budget, 3,420,000. And a total sales volume variance for the variable cost by the amount of $380,000 unfavorable, and a total variable cost for the static budget by the amount of $3,040,000. Any questions? Of course, deducting the total variable cost from the revenues would give us the contribution margin. The contribution margin that we introduced in Cost Accounting 1. Therefore, the contribution margin in this case would be as follows: 2,400,000 920,400 favorable, and 1,080,000 120,000 favorable, and that does 960,000. After the contribution margin, we would deduct the last segment, or the last cost, which is the fixed. According to the question, the actual was 501,900. According to the budgeted amount was 470, which would be for the same for the flexible budget and the static budget. Therefore, we would never have a variance here, and the variance for the flexible budget variance is 31,900, which is always a spending variance, because, as we said, we do not have an efficiency variance for the fixed manufacturing overhead costs. Of course, at last, we can calculate our operating income by deducting the contribution margin, or by deducting the fixed cost from the contribution margin. We would have an operating income for the actual by the amount of 1,498,500, and a total flexible budget variance by the amount of 888,500, of course favorable. And we would have an operating income for the flexible budget by the amount of 610, and a total sales volume variance by the amount of 120,000, also favorable, and an operating income for the static budget by the amount of $490,000. Any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, this is the level 2 analysis. In order to understand, or in order to calculate what is the sales volume variance and what is the flexible budget variance. And of course, this flexible budget variance could be detailed more into spending and efficiency variances as we did in requirement number 1. As we saw in requirement number 1, the 20,400 was because of two different variances. The first was a spending variance and the second was an efficiency variance. And of course, for our fixed cost, the 31,900, which is only a spending variance. And we calculated another variance, which is the production volume variance, that is not presented in this analysis. As we can see here, the production volume variance is not presented in this level 2 analysis. Any questions?
Calculate the operating income based on budgeted profit per shopping bag.
Therefore, they need us to calculate the budgeted cost per shopping bag. So what do you think is the budgeted cost per shopping bag?
490,000 divided by 8,000.
How much? The budgeted cost per one bag. We need to consider now. Of course, we have different costs. We have direct materials, we have direct labor, we have variable manufacturing overhead, we have fixed manufacturing overhead. Of course, some of them are as a lump sum amount as the fixed expenses, and some of them are already as a unit amount, like the direct materials and the direct labor. And some of them are in terms of machine hours, correct? Therefore, what do you think is the cost or the budgeted cost per one bag? Do we have a total cost in order to divide it by the number of bags? So what do you think? Excellent. Excellent. Therefore, first of all, we have the direct materials. Yes. We are going to calculate the budgeted income according to our calculation to the costs. The income is the revenues minus the cost, correct? Therefore, we need to know the revenues, which is obvious. 900,000 multiplied by the $6, I think. Yes, by the $6 or the $5 because they need the budgeted. Yes, multiplied by 5. This is the revenues. Now we need to know the cost for these units in order to calculate the operating income, correct? Therefore, first of all, we need to calculate the cost per shopping bag in order to calculate the operating income. Therefore, we have the direct materials as 1.2 per unit. Therefore, we are going to take this number as it is. We have also the direct labor or the direct manufacturing labor as 1.8 also dollars per unit. Yes, are there any costs? Are there any other costs? Yes. We have the fixed and we have also the variable. Therefore, the variable overhead costs, which is 1.6, correct? You need to consider that this 1.6 is per machine hour, not per unit. Therefore, we need to change this 1.6 from per machine hour to per unit. So what do you think we need to do? We know that this 1.6 is for one machine hour, and we know that each unit needs 0.5 machine hours. Therefore, each unit needs half of the 1.6, correct? Therefore, it would be 0.8. Of course, the 0.8 is the $1.6 per machine hour multiplied by 0.5 in order to change this amount from per machine hour to per unit. And then the fixed overhead cost or the fixed manufacturing overhead cost would be, we calculated it in number 1. we found out that the budgeted fixed overhead rate to be equal, of course we divided the 470,000 by the number of machine hours, 400,000. Therefore we had a 1.175, I think, dollars per machine hour. Therefore this amount is according to the machine hours. We need now to change this amount from per machine hour to per unit. Therefore we are going to multiply the 1.175 also by 0.5. which will equal 0.5875. Of course, per unit. Therefore, any questions? Therefore, as we can see here, we calculated, or we have designated, or we have listed the costs all per unit. The cost of direct materials, the cost of direct labor, the cost of the variable manufacturing overhead, and the cost of the fixed manufacturing overhead. Of course, the total cost now per unit would be 4.3875. Of course, per unit. Now, we need to calculate the budgeted operating income. Of course, the budgeted operating income, according to our standard costing system, would be the budgeted revenues minus the budgeted cost, according to the 4.3875. Correct? Because, as we said earlier in our discussions, that a standard costing would debit the work in process account with the standard amounts of direct materials, direct labor, variable manufacturing overhead, and the fixed manufacturing overhead. Correct? Therefore, each unit would be, or each unit produced would be debited by this amount, 4.3875. This is the concept of standard costing. When we make our entries, we debit the work in process account with this cost per unit. Any questions? Therefore, our budgeted operating income would equal our budgeted revenues, which is the $5 multiplied by the 900,000, which is 4,500,000, and our budgeted cost of goods sold would be 900,000 multiplied by 4.3875, which would be 3,948,750. Therefore, the budgeted operating income is 551,250. Yes, excellent. The same thing. Excellent. So what do you think the 551,250 represents? Yes. This is the operating income that would be according to our standard costing system. As we said, the standard costing systems would debit the work in process using the budgeted and the standard cost. As we can see here, each unit produced would be, or the work in process would be debited by 1.8 for direct labor, by 0.8 for variable manufacturing overhead, and 0.58 or 0.6, let us say, for the fixed manufacturing overhead. Therefore, this is the amount of the budgeted operating income that would be presented by using the standard costing system. Of course, after using the standard costing system, the actual income was not the 551,250, correct? It was, as we can see here, 1,498,500. So, what is this difference?
The variance.
Which variances? You are correct. You are 100% correct. The difference between the 551,250 and the 1,498,500 is because of the different variances. What are these different variances? What do you think are the different variances that was in play in this case? The spending variance of the variable manufacturing overhead. What else? The efficiency variance of the variable manufacturing overhead. What else? The spending variance of the fixed costs. What else? Only these three? Of course, as we can see here, for the direct materials and the direct labor, we do not have any variances. Therefore, is it only these two or these three variances? What else? What do you think is the reason, or what might be also the reasons of this difference between the 551,250 and the 1,498,500? We calculated a production volume variance by the amount of 58,750, correct? Which is also one of the reasons of these differences. As we can see here, we allocated the fixed costs as if it was variable, correct? Multiply the 0.5875 by 900,000. What would be the amount? Multiply it, come on. 0.5875 multiplied by 900,000. 528,750, which is not as the same as the budgeted amount, which is not as the same as the actual amount. Therefore, the production volume variance here is because that we treated the fixed manufacturing overhead here as a variable expense, which is not a right thing to do. This is a fixed expense that should be treated as one amount, but for some reasons that we discussed in Cost Accounting 1, we said we could not wait until the end of the period, therefore we need to allocate within the process, therefore we need to treat the fixed manufacturing overhead as a variable. Treating the fixed manufacturing overhead as a variable would present us with the problem of under-allocating or over-allocating these costs. Therefore, we would have a production volume variance. Therefore, the difference between the 551,250 and the 1,498,500 is because of the spending and efficiency variance of the variable manufacturing overhead, is because of the spending variance of the fixed overhead, is because of the selling price variance also of the 900,000 units, and also which is not presented in our flexible budget variance at all, is the production volume variance. Therefore, the difference between these two are because of the flexible budget variances, whether it is for the fixed or variable, whether it is for the selling price or not, as well as the production volume variance, which we are going to see in requirement number 4. Please read requirement number 4.
Reconcile the budgeted operating income from requirement 3 to the actual operating income from your chart and requirement 2.
So we need to reconcile this income or this operating income that was calculated according to our budgeted revenues, according to our budgeted allocated costs, and the actual, which is, as we said, is because of 4 things. Because of the spending and efficiency variances for the variable and the fixed, because of the selling price, which is also both or combined is the flexible budget variance, as well as the production volume variance. We need not to ignore the production volume variance. Therefore, the reconciliation would be as follows. We are going to start with the budgeted operating income by the amount of 551,250. And then we are going to consider all the variances that were calculated before. We have calculated different variances for the variable and the fixed manufacturing overhead. Therefore, we are now to consider these variances in order to reconcile this amount to the actual amount. According to our standard costing, if we do not recognize the variances, this would be the amount of the operating income that would be reported under a standard costing. But then we as accountants, we also consider what? The variances, which is the production volume variance, the spending variances, the efficiency variances, and so on, and the selling price variances, and so on. The recognition of these variances would reconcile this budgeted operating income onto the actual operating income, of course, after prorating these amounts, or after, let us say, considering the actual amounts within our operating system or our accounting system. Therefore, first of all, we need to consider the 88,000 or the 888,500 favorable flexible budget variance. Do you think we need to add it or deduct it from the 551,250? Deduct it. Why? What is the definition of a favorable variance? Decrease or increase, therefore we need to add it. Therefore, favorable variances would be added to the budgeted operating income. Correct? In order to, or in an attempt to reconcile it with the actual operating income. Therefore, the flexible budget variance by the amount of 888,500. Of course, the 888,500 is the spending variance of the fixed manufacturing overhead, is the spending and the efficiency variance for the variable manufacturing overhead, and is the selling price variance of the revenues. Therefore, all these were considered or is taken into consideration by only taking or by only recognizing the 888,500. Is this only the variance, or is these only the variances that we need to consider in order to reconcile the two? The last one is the production volume variance, because in our calculation, or according to our accounting information system, we have treated the fixed manufacturing overhead as variable while it is not, while it should be recognized as one amount, as a lump sum amount. Therefore, we need to consider the production volume variance. Of course, the production volume variance was a favorable or unfavorable. It was a favorable amount, or a favorable variance by the amount of 58,000, I think, 58,750. Therefore, 551,250 plus 888,500 plus the 58,750 would most definitely equal 1,498,500. So as we can see here, the difference between these two amounts was because of the flexible budget variance and of course its components, and the production volume variance that was not presented in our level 2 analysis. Any questions? Yes. It is 58,750. Go back to requirement number 1. In requirement number 1, we had an allocated amount for the fixed overhead variances by the amount of 528,750, correct? And we had a static budget or a flexible budget, even fixed overhead, by the amount of 470. The difference between the two is the 58,750. This was our production volume variance. Any questions? Now, number 5.
Calculate the operating income volume variance and show how the sales volume variance is comprised of the production volume variance and the operating income volume variance.
Therefore, now they need the operating income volume variance, and they need to, or they need us to analyze the sales volume variance. Let us do this. So first of all, we need to calculate the operating income volume variance. What do you think, or how do we calculate the operating income volume variance? Of course, the operating income volume variance is the difference between the budgeted operating income that was calculated before and the static budget operating income. This would be our operating income volume variance. Therefore, we have a budgeted operating income by the amount of 551,250 and a static budget operating income by the amount of $490,000. The difference would be 61,250. Is it favorable or unfavorable? According to our static budget, it was only 490. But according to our budgeted operating income, it is 550. According to our 900,000 units, this means unfavorable. This is an operating income. Our operating income has increased in comparison with the static budget. Therefore, this is a favorable variance. The static budget operating income was calculated according to the 800,000 units, while as we just saw here, our budgeted operating income was calculated according to what? To the 900,000 units. These were according to the 900,000 units, which is the actual output. So, what do you think is the reason of this operating income volume variance? Why do we have a 61,250 favorable variance here? Because of the difference between the 800,000 and the 900,000. We have $61,250,000 more operating income because we increased our production by 100,000 units. Therefore, this is the concept, or this is the cause, or this is the analysis of the $61,250. Now, always the sales volume variance consists of two variances: the operating income volume variance and the production volume variance. Always the sales volume variance is comprised of two variances: the operating income volume variance, which is the reason or it is caused by the difference between the budgeted number of units and the actual number of units, which is in this case 61,250, and the production volume variance, which is the reason of treating the fixed expenses and the fixed costs as variable while they are not. Therefore, the flexible budget variance, the production volume variance is 58,750, which is also favorable. Adding these two amounts, the 61,250 and the 58,750, would most definitely give us the sales volume variance, or the operating income sales volume variance. Of course, adding these two amounts would give us the 120,000 favorable sales volume variance. Therefore, the sales volume variance could be classified onto two variances. The first is the operating income volume variance, and the second is the production volume variance. By this, we finish our discussion in chapter number 7 or 8, and inshallah the next time we are going to start with chapter number 16, because we are out of time today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you inshallah the next time.